The night in New York City was like a canvas painted with shades of gold and deep blue. The lights of the Empire State Building flickered in the distance, creating a dance of reflections on the Hudson River, while the elegant streets of Midtown were filled with murmurs and laughter. It was an ordinary night at the luxurious Grand Regency Hotel, a destination reserved for the rich and famous. The hotel staff, impeccably dressed, attended to the guests with discreet smiles and near-perfect efficiency. However, that night, something unexpected was about to happen. Amidst the elegance and luxury, a humble figure approached the grand entrance of the hotel. She was a woman in modest clothing with a tired gaze, but with determination shining in her eyes. Her name was Maria Reyes, a single mother from a small town in Texas, who had traveled halfway around the world to get here. The journey had been long and exhausting, but Maria felt she had no other option. This was her last hope. Maria stopped in front of the hotel doors, unsure of what to do next. The cool New York air caressed her face, but it couldn't calm the nerves that were overwhelming her. In her hands, she held a wrinkled and worn photograph, one she had kept for nearly 2 decades. The image showed a young man, smiling, alongside her on a Texas beach. Maria knew it was her only proof, her only link to the man she had come to find. Jonathan Foster, the millionaire owner of the Grand Regency Hotel. The doormen, accustomed to seeing only the Parisian elite, frowned as she approached. One of them, a tall man with a skeptical expression, addressed Maria with a cold tone. "Ma'am, how can I help you?" he asked, clearly doubting her intentions. Maria took a deep breath and, without hesitation, showed the photo. Her voice was low but steady. "I'm looking for Jonathan Foster. It's urgent. Please." The doorman looked at the photograph, visibly puzzled, but before he could respond, a tall and elegant figure appeared behind him. It was Jonathan himself, who had approached to check the cause of the commotion. His perfectly tailored suit and poised demeanor made him seem even more distant from the young man in the photo that Maria held so carefully. When their eyes met, time seemed to stand still. Jonathan froze, as if he had seen a ghost. Maria barely managed to hold back her tears. He was exactly as she remembered, though now there were lines on his face and a hardened look she hadn't seen before. Still, behind that facade of power, she recognized the young man she had met many years ago. "Maria," Jonathan whispered, almost inaudibly, unable to believe what he was seeing. "Jonathan," she replied, with a lump in her throat. The doorman, confused, watched them exchange bewildered glances. Jonathan seemed to regain his composure and, with a brusque gesture, signaled the staff to leave them alone. "Come with me," he said authoritatively, taking Maria by the arm firmly but not aggressively. He led her through the hotel's corridors, passing by halls adorned with crystal chandeliers and Renaissance paintings until they reached the presidential suite. It was a place that exuded opulence, but Maria barely noticed it. Her mind was overwhelmed with memories and questions she had accumulated over the years. Jonathan closed the door behind them and turned to face her, still trying to process what was happening. "Why are you here?" he finally asked, with a mix of disbelief and concern. Maria squeezed the photograph between her fingers and took a step toward him. "I had no choice. I came for our son." The words echoed in the room like thunder. Jonathan was left speechless, unable to react. The photograph slipped from Maria's hands and fell to the floor, exposed on the white marble. The image of the young lovers smiling on the Texas beach seemed like another time, another life. Jonathan picked it up with trembling hands and looked at it as if seeing her for the first time. "A son?" he repeated, whispering as if he couldn't believe it. "Yes, Jonathan, our son. His name is Samuel, and he's 17 years old. He's here in New York with me." The ensuing silence was deafening. Jonathan felt the world beneath his feet wobble. He had never imagined he would see her again, especially not like this, arriving at his doorstep. All these years, he had lived a life of luxury and success, but the memory of Maria had always remained hidden deep within his heart. Now, everything was resurfacing, and he didn't know how to handle it. Maria, with tears rolling down her cheeks, took another step toward him. "I didn't come to ask for anything," she said, her voice breaking. "Samuel is a bright young man, but we've faced many hardships. He wants to meet you, Jonathan. He wants to know who his father is." Jonathan looked into her eyes, seeking answers, but only finding the truth he had dreaded confronting for so long. He took a deep breath and nodded, knowing there was no way to escape this. "Bring him here," he said finally. "I want to meet my son." Maria nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, and turned to leave the suite. As she did, Jonathan sank into a chair, staring blankly at the photo, feeling as though his entire world had changed in an instant. He didn't know what to expect from meeting Samuel, but one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. Maria walked out of the presidential suite with her heart racing, her hands trembling, as she navigated the elegant corridors of the Grand Regency Hotel. She knew that after so many years, this moment would be difficult, but she hadn't anticipated Jonathan's reaction to be so intense. The mix of surprise, pain, and regret in his eyes revealed more than he had expressed. She stopped in front of the reception area where Samuel was waiting, observing his surroundings with a blend of curiosity and nervousness. The young man, tall and slender with tousled brown hair, contrasted sharply with the hotel's elegance. His deep green eyes were a mirror of his father's, though he didn't yet know it. Samuel looked at her, searching for answers in his mother's expression. "Did you speak with him?" Samuel asked, his voice trembling but full of determination. Maria nodded slowly, trying to mask the lump in her throat. She placed a hand on her son's shoulder, attempting to convey calmness, even though she was filled with anxiety herself. "Yes, son. He wants to see you. He's waiting in his suite." Samuel swallowed hard, processing the news. Throughout his life, he had imagined this moment in 1,000 different ways. In his dreams, his father was always a noble man, someone who had had to leave for reasons beyond his control. But now, facing the reality that his father was a millionaire living in luxury while he and his mother struggled to survive, filled his heart with questions and a spark of resentment. "Then let's go," Samuel said firmly. Maria took his hand, and together they walked toward the presidential suite. The sound of their footsteps echoed down the hallway, amplifying the tension between them. When they reached the door, Maria took a deep breath and knocked gently. Jonathan opened the door almost immediately, as if he had been anxiously waiting. Upon seeing Samuel, his eyes filled with emotion. It was as if he was looking at himself in a mirror from the past. However, Samuel looked at him with a mix of curiosity and coldness, unsure of exactly what to feel. "Hello, Samuel," Jonathan said, his voice wavering. I am your father." Samuel didn't respond immediately. He looked him up and down, as if evaluating a stranger. Then, unable to hold back, he let out a bitter laugh. "My father," he repeated, shaking his head. "Where have you been all these 17 years? The question sliced through the air like a knife. Jonathan lowered his gaze, feeling the weight of guilt pressing down on him like a heavy burden. He had no easy answer to give. He had made decisions in the past that now seemed insignificant compared to the pain in his son's eyes. "I didn't know you existed," Jonathan admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "If I had known, I never would have left." Samuel clenched his fists, feeling anger burning in his chest. "Does that make it better?" he asked sarcastically. "Maybe you didn't know, but my mother did, and she did everything she could for me. While you lived surrounded by luxury, we struggled to get by." Maria, sensing the conversation becoming too tense, intervened softly, placing a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "Son, I came here to give you the chance to meet him, not to create more resentment. Jonathan deserves to hear our story, and you deserve to know the truth." Jonathan slowly approached, feeling that each step toward his son was like walking on a minefield. He looked at Maria, seeking her support, and she returned his gaze with sadness and understanding. "You're right, Samuel," Jonathan admitted. "I failed you, and I failed your mother. I should never have left without looking back, but I can't change the past. The only thing I can do now is try to make amends for my mistakes." Samuel took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Jonathan's words had affected him more than he wanted to admit. He had imagined his father as an indifferent man, but now, seeing him so vulnerable, his anger began to crumble. "I want to know why you left," Samuel said finally, "and I want to know why you never came back." Jonathan nodded, understanding that he needed to be honest. "It's not a simple story, son," he began. "When I met your mother, I was young and naive. I was in Texas for a cultural exchange program, and I fell in love with her like I had never loved anyone before. But my family, they didn't approve of my relationship with someone outside our social circle. They forced me to return to New York, and after my father's death, I found myself trapped in the family business and the expectations that came with it. I didn't know how to fight against it." Maria wiped a tear rolling down her cheek. She had waited so long to hear those words, but they didn't bring the peace she had imagined. Samuel, on the other hand, seemed more confused than ever. "So you left because they told you to?" Samuel asked, his voice trembling. "That's all." "No," Jonathan said, shaking his head. "I left because I was a coward. I was afraid of what I might find. I knew I had hurt you, and I convinced myself that it was better for you to move on without me. I took refuge in work and business, trying to forget what I couldn't truly forget. But when I saw you yesterday, I realized how wrong I was." Samuel looked at him in silence, struggling with his emotions. Finally, he took a step back and nodded. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you, but I'm willing to listen to your story. I just don't want you to keep running away from the truth." Jonathan nodded, relieved by the small opening his son had given him. He felt the wall between them beginning to crumble, though he knew there was still a long way to go. "Thank you, Samuel," he said softly. "I promise I won't disappear this time." Maria, who had watched the entire conversation with her heart in her throat, felt a sense of relief. Although the tension was still palpable, for the first time in many years, she saw a small spark of hope. Jonathan took a deep breath and stood up, moving toward the door. "I'm going to prepare something for dinner," he said. "Maybe we can continue talking while we eat." Samuel nodded, and Maria gave him a reassuring squeeze, grateful for his willingness to listen. As the three of them moved toward the private dining area of the suite, a new chapter of their lives was about to begin. The table in the private dining area of the presidential suite was set with elegance, reflecting the luxury that surrounded Jonathan in his daily life. However, for him that night, the details of the decor and the exquisite dishes prepared by the hotel's personal chef went unnoticed. His attention was entirely focused on Maria and the young man who, until a few hours ago, he didn't know existed. Samuel sat across from Jonathan, observing the space with attentive and cautious eyes. Although the opulent setting of the hotel intimidated him, he maintained a firm posture, determined not to be swayed by his surroundings. Maria, seated beside him, tried to calm the nerves swirling within her. She knew that this dinner would not be easy, but she also understood that it was a necessary step to heal wounds and rebuild broken ties. The initial silence was heavy and uncomfortable. Each person seemed lost in their thoughts, unsure of how to begin a conversation that felt so urgent and delicate. Finally, it was Jonathan who broke the silence, his voice cautious yet sincere. "I want to thank both of you for giving me this opportunity. I didn't expect destiny to bring us together this way, but now that you're here, I want to make the most of every moment." Samuel looked at him with a difficult-to-read expression and nodded silently. Maria gave Jonathan a slight smile, trying to ease the tension. "It wasn't easy making this decision," Maria responded calmly. "For years, I tried to leave the past behind, but Samuel deserves to know who his father is. I can't take that truth away from him." Jonathan nodded, understanding the sacrifice and courage Maria had shown by taking that flight to New York. His admiration for her grew internally, though words seemed insufficient to express it. "Samuel, I know you have many questions," Jonathan said, directing his gaze toward the young man. "And I want to answer them all, even if the answers are hard to accept." Samuel leaned back in his chair, observing him with a mixture of challenge and expectation. "Then tell me," the young man began, his voice clear and firm, "why do you think you can walk into our lives now and fix everything?" The question echoed in the room like a bitter refrain. Jonathan remained silent, struggling to find the right words. He knew there was no answer that could erase years of absence and sacrifice, but he also understood that he needed to be honest. "I don't think I can fix everything," Jonathan admitted humbly. "But I do believe I can try to make up for lost time, if you allow me. I can't change the past, Samuel, but I'm willing to do everything I can to compensate in some way." Samuel looked down, as if processing each word. The wound in his heart was deep, and the promises seemed insufficient to fill the void he had felt his entire life. However, there was something genuine in Jonathan's voice that puzzled him. "I don't want you to think you can buy my affection, just because you now know I'm your father," Samuel responded firmly. "I don't need your money, I just want the truth. It's not fair that you left us behind while you lived surrounded by luxury." Jonathan nodded, acknowledging the validity of Samuel's words. Maria looked at him with understanding eyes, knowing that the path to reconciliation would be long and fraught with obstacles. "I'm not trying to buy you, Samuel," Jonathan said sincerely. "I'm trying to be a father, even if it's late, and I know I can't ask you to trust me immediately, but I want you to know that my intentions are genuine." The intensity in Jonathan's voice left Samuel momentarily speechless. Despite his resentment, he began to see in the man before him someone genuinely remorseful, someone who desired a second chance. But the pain of the past remained, and he couldn't easily ignore it. The dinner continued in a reflective silence. Maria, observing both of them, realized that this encounter had been necessary, though painful. The wounds were still fresh, but the possibility of healing seemed real. As the meal concluded, Jonathan stood up and looked at Samuel with a determined expression. "I don't want to rush you, Samuel. Take all the time you need to process all of this. But while you're in New York, consider this suite your home. And if at any point you want to talk or need anything, I'll be here for you." Samuel nodded silently, his thoughts a whirlwind of emotions he couldn't yet organize. Maria, grateful for Jonathan's gesture, placed a hand on her son's shoulder, offering support and strength. "Thank you, Jonathan. This is a good start," Maria said with a slight smile, acknowledging that although the road ahead was uncertain, the first step had been taken. Jonathan saw them off at the suite's door, watching as they walked down the hallway. He felt a mix of relief and anxiety. The reunion had been more challenging than he had imagined, but it had also awakened in him a hope he hadn't felt in years. As he returned to the suite, Jonathan realized that, although he had started late, he had the chance to build something authentic with his son. Now, it was up to him to prove that his intentions were sincere and that he was willing to make any necessary sacrifices to regain the lost time. With a firm resolve, he looked at the photograph of that Texas beach Maria had left on the table, and for the first time in a long while, felt that his life had a true purpose. That night, in the modest hotel room Maria had booked on the outskirts of New York City, Samuel lay on the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. The day had been an emotional roller coaster that he still couldn't fully process. He turned to his mother, who was sitting by the window, gazing thoughtfully at the city lights with a contemplative expression. "Mom," Samuel called softly, breaking the silence. "Why did you never tell me about him? Why did you keep this secret for so many years?" Maria sighed deeply, as if the breath leaving her lungs carried the weight of all those repressed memories. She stood up and sat beside her son, gently taking his hand in hers. "It wasn't an easy secret to keep, son," she began, her voice tinged with sadness. "I met Jonathan when I was young, just a dream-filled girl in our small Texas town. He was visiting as part of a cultural exchange program, and during those months, we fell deeply in love. But he didn't belong to our world. When he left, he promised to return, but he never did." Samuel looked at her, his eyes filled with questions, trying to understand what his mother had endured. "And you never tried to contact him?" he asked incredulously. "You never told him you were expecting a child?" Maria lowered her gaze, her eyes welling up with tears. "I did try, Samuel. I wrote letters. I called the number he gave me, but I never got a response. Over time, I understood that his life here in New York was very different. His family didn't approve of our relationship, and I knew they probably did everything they could to keep us apart." Samuel clenched his lips, trying to hold back the anger that was beginning to rise inside him. It wasn't just anger toward Jonathan, but toward everything that had been taken away from him and his mother. "He lived in wealth while you worked day and night to keep us afloat," he said, his voice filled with resentment. "How could you ever forgive him?" Maria smiled sadly and gently stroked his cheek. "It's not that I forgave him, son. It's that I chose to move forward. I chose to focus on you, to give us the best life possible with what little we had. I kept the photo because I wanted you to know where you come from, but I never thought we would come here to find him." Samuel sighed, letting himself fall onto the bed. His emotions were tangled, like a whirlwind he couldn't control. "So why now?" he asked, looking at his mother with a mix of confusion and pain. "What made you change your mind?" Maria stood up and walked to the small table where she had left a worn cardboard box. She opened it slowly and took out a folder of documents. She handed it to Samuel, who took it with trembling hands. "I wanted to tell you earlier, but I didn't know how," Maria said softly. "We're in a difficult situation, son. The factory where I work has closed, and our debts have piled up. I can't afford your education, and I know how much it means to you." Samuel flipped through the papers, seeing bills and overdue notices. He felt the world crumbling around him. All his life, he had seen his mother work tirelessly, but he never imagined they were in such dire straits. "That's why you came here," he murmured, finally understanding. "It's not just for me. You have no other option." Maria nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Samuel. I didn't want you to feel like a burden. I always dreamed of giving you a better future, but I've run out of options. I thought that if your father could help, you deserve to at least know him and hear his side of the story." Samuel gritted his teeth, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "I don't know if I can forgive him, Mom. I don't know if I can accept his help after everything we've gone through alone." Maria embraced him tightly, feeling his pain as if it were her own. "You don't have to decide anything now," she whispered. "I just want you to think about what's best for you. I came here for you because you deserve all the opportunities I couldn't provide. No matter what you decide, I'll be by your side." Silence enveloped the room as Samuel rested his head on his mother's chest, letting the tears flow freely. He had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. But he had also never felt his mother's love so palpably and protectively. The next morning, early and still dark, Samuel woke up with a renewed sense of determination. He knew he needed to confront Jonathan once more, not just for his own peace, but also for the sacrifice his mother had made by bringing him here. He got up, dressed, and looked at Maria, who was still sleeping peacefully after their long conversation the night before. Samuel took the photo of his mother and Jonathan, the same one he had found by chance that had sparked this unexpected journey. He tucked it into his pocket and left the room, determined to face the man he now knew was his father. When he returned to the luxurious hotel, the staff recognized him and allowed him to pass without questions. He made his way to the presidential suite with firm steps, feeling adrenaline coursing through his body. He knocked on the door, and this time, Jonathan opened it almost immediately. His expression a mix of surprise and hope. "Can we talk?" Samuel asked, his voice steady but filled with intent. Jonathan nodded, moving to let him in. "Of course, Samuel. I'm here to listen to whatever you have to say." The young man entered, once again taking in the opulence that starkly contrasted his own life. He turned to Jonathan, and for the first time, he didn't see a wealthy magnate but a man, a father he needed to confront in his own story. "I'm not here to accept your help," Samuel said firmly. "I'm here because I need answers. I need to know who you really are and what you plan to do now that you know I exist." Jonathan looked at him with a mixture of sadness and admiration. Despite everything, he couldn't help but feel proud of the young man before him. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he understood that this was his chance to build a future, though uncertain. "I'll tell you everything, Samuel," Jonathan replied, his voice trembling. "And I promise there will be no more secrets." Samuel nodded slowly, ready to listen but not entirely prepared for what he might discover. The internal battle he was fighting was visible in his eyes, and Jonathan felt that the real challenge was just beginning. Jonathan guided Samuel and Maria to the private dining area of the presidential suite, where an elegant table had been set for dinner. The room was adorned with fine china, crystal glassware, and silver cutlery, reflecting the opulence that Jonathan was accustomed to. However, for him, tonight was different. The usual grandeur felt empty compared to the raw emotions filling the room. Samuel sat across from Jonathan, his posture tense yet resolute. Maria took her place beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she tried to steady her nerves. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken thoughts and lingering questions. Finally, Jonathan broke the silence, his voice measured and sincere. "I want to thank both of you for giving me this opportunity. I never imagined our paths would cross like this, but now that you're here, I want to make the most of it." Samuel looked at his father with a guarded expression, his eyes searching for any sign of deceit or insincerity. Maria offered a small, reassuring smile to Samuel, hoping to ease some of the tension. "It wasn't easy making this decision," Maria began, her voice calm but edged with emotion. "For years I tried to leave the past behind. But Samuel deserves to know who his father is. I can't take that truth away from him." Jonathan nodded, appreciating Maria's strength and resolve. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. "Samuel, I know you have many questions," he said, directing his gaze toward the young man. "And I want to answer them all, even if the answers are hard to accept." Samuel leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "Then tell me," he responded firmly, "why do you think you can walk into our lives now and fix everything?" Jonathan paused, struggling to find the right words. He knew that no amount of explanation could erase the years of absence and the struggles Maria had endured alone. But he also understood that honesty was the only path forward. "I don't think I can fix everything," Jonathan admitted humbly. "But I do believe I can try to make up for lost time if you allow me. I can't change the past, Samuel, but I'm willing to do everything I can to compensate in some way." Samuel looked down, his jaw clenched as he processed his father's words. The anger and resentment he had harbored were palpable, but so was a flicker of hope, a hope that perhaps things could change. "I don't want you to think you can buy my affection just because you now know I'm your father," Samuel responded firmly. "I don't need your money. I just want the truth. It's not fair that you left us behind while you lived surrounded by luxury." Jonathan nodded, acknowledging the validity of Samuel's feelings. Maria watched the exchange, feeling a mix of pride and sorrow. She had always hoped for this moment, but seeing her son struggle so visibly was heartbreaking. "I'm not trying to buy you, Samuel," Jonathan said sincerely. "I'm trying to be a father, even if it's late. And I know I can't ask you to trust me immediately, but I want you to know that my intentions are genuine." The intensity in Jonathan's voice left Samuel momentarily speechless. Despite his resentment, he began to see in the man before him someone genuinely remorseful, someone who desired a second chance. But the pain of the past remained, and he couldn't easily ignore it. The dinner continued in a reflective silence. Maria, observing both of them, realized that this encounter had been necessary, though painful. The wounds were still fresh, but the possibility of healing seemed real. As the meal progressed, Jonathan decided it was time to reveal more of his side of the story. He reached across the table, placing his hand gently over Samuel's. "There's something I need to share with you both," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I met Maria, I was in Texas for a business trip. I was young and naive, and I didn't fully understand the consequences of my actions. Our relationship was brief but intense, and I fell deeply in love with her. But my family, they didn't approve. They had high expectations for me, and our relationship wasn't something they could accept. When I left, it wasn't just me physically departing. I was forced to abandon the possibility of a future with Maria." Maria listened, her heart aching as she watched her husband reveal the depths of his regret. Samuel, meanwhile, felt a surge of emotions: anger, sadness, and a begrudging empathy. "After that, I returned to New York, taking over the family business after my father passed away. The pressures were immense, and I felt trapped by the legacy I was expected to uphold. I threw myself into work, trying to forget the past and the life I had briefly shared with Maria. But seeing you here, Samuel, brought everything rushing back. I realized that my pursuit of success had cost me the most important thing in my life, my family. Samuel's eyes welled up with tears, and he looked at Jonathan with a mixture of pain and understanding. "So, you left because of your family's expectations?" Samuel asked, his voice softer now. "Because you felt trapped?" Jonathan nodded, his own eyes misting over. "Yes, I was scared, Samuel. Scared of disappointing my family, scared of facing the consequences of defying them. I thought if I focused solely on the business, I could somehow compensate for the absence. But all it did was create a life void of the one thing that truly mattered." Maria reached out, taking Samuel's hand and placing it over Jonathan's. "Samuel, this isn't just about Jonathan wanting to make amends. It's about us as a family finding a way to move forward together. We've been through so much, and I believe that with Jonathan's support, we can overcome these challenges." Samuel looked between his parents, feeling the weight of their struggles and the complexity of their emotions. "I want to help," he said quietly. "Not just to take your money, but to understand and to be part of something bigger. I need to know that you're here for me, and that you're willing to support me in ways that truly matter." Jonathan squeezed Samuel's hand gently, a silent promise passing between them. "I am here, Samuel. I want to be here for you, in every way I can. Not just financially, but emotionally and morally. I want to rebuild the relationship that I failed to nurture years ago." Maria smiled through her tears, feeling a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. "This is a good start," she said softly. "We have a long way to go, but tonight is a step in the right direction." Jonathan stood up, feeling the tension in the room begin to ease. He motioned for the waiter to leave them a bit of privacy. "Thank you for giving me this chance," he said to Samuel. "I know it won't be easy, and I'm prepared to earn your trust, one day at a time." Samuel nodded, a small, genuine smile forming on his lips. "I appreciate that," he replied. "Let's see where this goes." As they concluded their meal, the atmosphere had shifted. What began with tension and uncertainty had transformed into a foundation for potential healing and reconciliation. Maria felt a weight lift off her shoulders, knowing that her family was finally taking the first steps toward mending their broken bonds. After dinner, Jonathan walked Samuel back to the suite, their conversation now lighter but still filled with the gravity of their new relationship. "If you ever need anything, Samuel, don't hesitate to ask," Jonathan said, his tone earnest. "I want to support you in any way I can." Samuel looked at his father, feeling a mix of emotions, but also a sense of relief. "Thank you, Jonathan. That means a lot." As Samuel and Maria settled into their room that night, Maria felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope for her family's future. Samuel, lying in bed, reflected on the evening's events. He had faced his father's harsh truths and had come out on the other side with a newfound understanding. While forgiveness wasn't something he could offer immediately, the foundation for a meaningful relationship had been laid. Meanwhile, Jonathan sat alone in his suite, staring at the photograph that had started it all. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, driven by the desire to make things right and to be the father his son deserved. As the night deepened, the Grand Regency Hotel stood as a silent witness to the beginning of a new chapter for Maria, Samuel, and Jonathan, a chapter filled with the promise of healing, understanding, and the enduring strength of family. As the sun rose over New York City, its golden rays illuminated the skyline, casting a warm glow across the bustling streets below. Maria awoke in her hotel room, feeling an unfamiliar sense of hope. The events of the previous evening replayed in her mind, a mix of emotions swirling within her. She turned to see Samuel still asleep, his face relaxed and peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had characterized his life until now. After preparing herself for the day, Maria gently shook Samuel awake. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said with a soft smile. "We have a big day ahead." Samuel blinked, rubbing his eyes, still trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. "What time is it?" he asked, groggy but smiling back at her. It's early, but we need to meet Jonathan for breakfast, Maria reminded him, her voice filled with encouragement. Samuel sat up slowly, the weight of the previous day still resting heavily on his shoulders. He had faced his father, shared his feelings, and had even begun to consider a relationship, but he also felt a flicker of anxiety about what the day might bring. Right, breakfast, he murmured, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. I guess it's time to see what else he has to say. After getting dressed, they made their way down to the hotel restaurant, a lavish space with high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. As they entered, they spotted Jonathan already seated at a table, looking over the menu. He looked up and smiled, his expression warm and inviting. Good morning, he greeted them, rising to greet them. I hope you're ready for some of the best pancakes in the city. Maria smiled, but Samuel maintained a more guarded demeanor as they took their seats. Jonathan sensed the tension but remained optimistic. How did you sleep? He asked, pouring fresh orange juice into their glasses. Better than I expected, Maria replied, glancing at Samuel, who nodded in agreement. Jonathan took a deep breath, trying to gauge the atmosphere. He knew that they were all still navigating a complex web of emotions, and he was determined to keep the conversation open and honest. So, I thought we could talk about what you're interested in for your future, Samuel, Jonathan began, looking directly at his son. I know we touched on it a bit last night, but I'd like to hear more about your dreams and aspirations. Samuel hesitated, unsure of how to approach the subject. It was one thing to discuss it with his mother, but another entirely to lay it bare in front of Jonathan. I want to study engineering, Samuel finally said, his voice steady. I've always been interested in how things work, designing and building things that can help people. Jonathan's eyes lit up with interest. That's fantastic. Engineering is a noble field. I'd love to hear about your ideas and projects. Perhaps there's a way I can support you in that journey. Samuel looked at Jonathan, searching for any sign of insincerity. He had braced himself for a sales pitch, but instead, he found a genuine interest in his passions. It caught him off guard. I mean, I'd appreciate any help, but I don't want it to come with strings attached, Samuel replied cautiously. Jonathan nodded, understanding the hesitation in Samuel's tone. I promise. No strings attached. This is about you, not me. I want you to have the opportunities I never had, he assured him. As breakfast arrived, the conversation flowed more easily. They discussed engineering schools, innovative technologies, and the potential for creating sustainable solutions. With every word, Samuel felt a flicker of excitement that had been absent in his life for far too long. Maria observed the dynamic between the two, her heart swelling with hope. Perhaps this could work. Perhaps Jonathan could be a father to Samuel in ways that would matter. After they finished eating, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you both, he began, his tone shifting slightly. I've been thinking a lot about how I can support you, Samuel. I want to offer you an internship this summer at my company. Samuel's eyebrows shot up in surprise. An internship? At your company? He asked, incredulity evident in his voice. Yes, Jonathan said, nodding. It would give you hands-on experience and a chance to work alongside professionals in the field. You could see if this is the direction you want to take and gain valuable insights. Maria felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. It was a generous offer, but she worried about the implications. Would Samuel feel pressured to accept just because Jonathan was his father? That's a big offer, Jonathan, she said cautiously. I think Samuel should have the space to consider it without feeling obligated. Jonathan waved off her concerns. I understand, Maria. I want Samuel to make his own choices. The offer stands, but he doesn't have to accept it if he doesn't want to. Samuel, I want you to know that this is your decision. Samuel sat in silence, weighing the offer. On one hand, it was an incredible opportunity. On the other, it came with complexities he wasn't sure he was ready to face. I'll think about it, he replied finally. I'm not sure what I want just yet, but I appreciate it. Jonathan smiled, satisfied with the response. He knew that building trust and understanding would take time, and he was willing to be patient. As they left the restaurant, Maria felt lighter than she had in years. She had worried that the reunion would unravel everything, but instead, it seemed to be knitting their lives back together. Walking through the vibrant streets of New York, Jonathan fell into step beside Samuel, trying to bridge the gap that had stretched between them for so long. "So, what do you think of the city?" Jonathan asked, genuinely curious. Samuel glanced around, taking in the towering skyscrapers and bustling crowds. "I think it's overwhelming," he admitted, "but also kind of amazing. There's so much going on, so many possibilities." Jonathan nodded, sensing the shift in his son's perspective. "This city can be a lot, but it's also a place where dreams can come true. You just have to be willing to chase them," he said, his eyes reflecting the ambition that had driven him for years. Samuel paused, considering Jonathan's words. Perhaps this city, with all its chaos, could also be a place of new beginnings for him, a chance to carve out a future that was his own. As they walked, a sense of possibility filled the air, and Samuel began to feel that maybe, just maybe, he could find his own place in this vast city. The sun hung high in the New York sky as Jonathan, Samuel, and Maria strolled through Central Park, the vibrant greens and bright flowers providing a refreshing contrast to the concrete jungle surrounding them. The park was bustling with people enjoying the warm weather, families picnicking, children playing, and couples strolling hand in hand. As they walked, the atmosphere shifted, filled with a sense of hope and new beginnings. Jonathan turned to Samuel, who was walking slightly ahead, lost in thought. "I know this city can be overwhelming," Jonathan said, trying to gauge his son's feelings, "but there's so much potential here. I want you to explore it, to find what inspires you." Samuel glanced back at his father, absorbing the words. He had never thought of New York as a place of opportunity, but after their conversation over breakfast, he began to feel a flicker of curiosity. "It's just different," Samuel admitted. "I'm used to our small town, where everything feels familiar. Here, it's like there are a million paths I could take, but I have no idea which one to choose." Jonathan smiled, understanding the hesitation. He stopped and looked around, taking in the energy of the park. "That's how I felt when I first arrived here. I was scared and excited all at once, but every journey begins with a single step. Sometimes you just have to take that leap of faith," he encouraged. Maria watched them, feeling a swell of emotion. She had always wanted Samuel to have opportunities beyond what she could provide. This moment felt pivotal, a chance for her son to discover who he was meant to be. "You know, Samuel, your father is right," Maria chimed in, her voice warm and supportive. "You don't have to have everything figured out. Explore, take risks, and find what makes you passionate." Samuel looked at his mother, grateful for her unwavering support. "I appreciate that, but what if I mess up? What if I choose the wrong path?" he asked, a hint of anxiety creeping into his voice. "Everyone makes mistakes, Samuel. That's how we learn and grow," Jonathan replied, stepping closer. "I've made my share of them. The important thing is to keep moving forward. You can't let fear hold you back from discovering your true potential." As they continued walking, Jonathan couldn't shake the desire to offer Samuel more than just words of encouragement. He wanted to create an opportunity that could help him build his future. "Samuel, I really want you to consider the internship at my company," Jonathan said, his tone earnest. "It's not just about work, it's about experiencing what it's like to be part of something bigger. You'll get to see the engineering side of things, and I believe you'll excel." Samuel paused, his heart racing at the thought. It was a big step, one that could change the trajectory of his life, but the fear of the unknown loomed over him. "I don't know, Jonathan. It's a lot to take in." "What if I'm not cut out for it?" Samuel replied, uncertainty etched on his face. "You won't know until you try," Jonathan insisted. "And I promise, you won't be alone. You'll have mentors and colleagues who will support you. Plus, I'll be right there. You can lean on me for guidance." Maria, sensing Samuel's hesitation, took his hand, squeezing it gently. "This could be a chance for you to learn and grow, to see if this is what you want to pursue," she said encouragingly. "I believe in you and I know you have what it takes to succeed. Samuel looked at his mother, then back at Jonathan. He could feel the weight of their expectations and support. It was both comforting and intimidating. After a moment of silence, he took a deep breath and spoke. "Okay, I'll think about it. But I need time to figure out what I want, to see if this is the right path for me," he replied, feeling a flicker of determination. Jonathan nodded, pleased with the response. "That's all I ask. Take your time, and when you're ready, let's discuss the details together." As they continued their walk through the park, the conversation flowed more easily. Jonathan shared stories of his experiences growing up in a wealthy family, the pressures he faced, and how he had to navigate the expectations placed upon him. Samuel listened intently, realizing that his father's journey had been filled with its own challenges and obstacles. "It's not easy, but I learned that pursuing what you love is worth every struggle," Jonathan said, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. Samuel began to see Jonathan as a man who had fought his own battles, someone who had struggled with the weight of expectations. The connection between them was starting to take shape, built on shared experiences rather than just titles or money. Eventually, they found a quiet spot near a small pond, where ducks waddled and families gathered. They settled on a bench, the sun casting a warm glow over them. Maria looked at her son, her heart swelling with pride. "I'm so proud of you, Samuel," she said softly. "You're facing this with such courage." Samuel smiled at her, feeling her love and support surround him. "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you," he replied, knowing that her strength had always been his anchor. As the day began to wind down, they made their way back to the hotel, the vibrant energy of the city buzzing around them. Samuel felt a mix of excitement and apprehension, but he also felt lighter. The possibility of a new beginning loomed ahead. Back in the hotel room, Maria prepared for the evening while Samuel reflected on everything that had transpired. He looked at the photograph of his mother and Jonathan, the picture that had brought him here, and felt a sense of hope washing over him. "Whatever happens next, I'll face it head on," he thought to himself, a newfound determination settling in. Later that evening, they gathered for dinner at a cozy restaurant nearby. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the lavishness of the hotel. Over plates of pasta and fresh bread, the conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and shared stories. As they finished their meal, Jonathan looked at both Maria and Samuel, a serious expression on his face. "I want to propose something," he said, taking a deep breath. "I'd like to take you both to my home tomorrow. I think it's important for you to see where I live, the work I do, and the life I've built. It's a chance for you to understand me better, and for me to show you how serious I am about wanting to be a part of your lives." Samuel exchanged glances with Maria, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "That sounds like a big step," Maria replied cautiously. "Are you sure that's what you want?" "Absolutely. I want to be transparent and open about my life and how I can support both of you moving forward," Jonathan assured them. Samuel nodded slowly, realizing that this invitation could lead to a deeper understanding of his father. "Okay, I'll go," he said, a sense of resolve settling in. With that decision, a new chapter in their lives was about to unfold. As they left the restaurant and walked back to the hotel, Samuel felt a sense of optimism beginning to take root within him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he was ready to face them, ready to embrace whatever came next. The following morning, the sun shone brightly over New York City, casting a warm glow that filled the streets with a sense of promise. Maria and Samuel awoke with a renewed sense of purpose, both excited and anxious about the day ahead. As they prepared to meet Jonathan, Maria felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. After a quick breakfast, they made their way to the lobby of the Grand Regency Hotel, where Jonathan was waiting for them. He greeted them with a broad smile, exuding an energy that was both comforting and invigorating. "Are you ready for the day?" he asked, his enthusiasm infectious. Samuel nodded, feeling a mix of anticipation and nerves. "I think so," he replied. "What should we expect?" Jonathan chuckled lightly, his eyes sparkling. "Just a glimpse into my world. I want to show you my home and where I work, and how I manage the hotel chain. I believe it's important for you to see the bigger picture." As they walked out of the hotel and into the bright New York sun, Samuel felt the weight of the moment. This was a chance to see his father in a new light, to understand the man behind the title. They hopped into Jonathan's sleek black car, which took them through the bustling streets of Manhattan. The skyline loomed majestically as they navigated the traffic, and Jonathan shared anecdotes about the city's history, his family business, and the challenges he faced growing up. Once they arrived at Jonathan's apartment, a luxurious space overlooking Central Park, Samuel stepped inside, taking in the expansive views and modern decor. The walls were adorned with art pieces and photographs from Jonathan's travels, each telling a story of its own. "Wow, this place is amazing," Samuel said, genuinely impressed. Jonathan smiled, pleased to see his son's reaction. "Thank you. It took time to make it feel like home," he replied. "Let me show you around." As Jonathan guided them through the apartment, he shared stories about his travels, his business ventures, and the experiences that shaped him. Maria watched the two interact, feeling a swell of emotion. It was heartening to see them connecting, bridging the gap that had once felt insurmountable. After the tour, they settled in the spacious living room, where Jonathan offered them refreshments. "So, what do you think?" Jonathan asked, watching Samuel closely. "How does it feel to be here?" Samuel took a moment to gather his thoughts. "It's different, that's for sure," he admitted. "But it's nice to see where you come from." "I guess I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything." Jonathan nodded, understanding the complexity of Samuel's feelings. "I know it's a lot to take in. Just remember, I'm here for you, no matter what," he said, his tone sincere. Maria chimed in, her voice supportive. "We've been through a lot, but I believe we're moving in the right direction. We can take this step by step, together." With the conversation flowing more easily, Jonathan felt a sense of relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted, and he could finally see the possibility of a real relationship with his son. "Let's talk about the internship again," Jonathan suggested, turning his attention back to Samuel. "If you decide to take it, you'll have a chance to work on some exciting projects. You could gain hands-on experience and build connections in the field." Samuel considered the offer carefully. "I think I'm open to the idea, but I want to ensure it's the right fit for me," he replied thoughtfully. "I want to explore my options, not just jump into something because it's available." Jonathan smiled, feeling grateful for Samuel's maturity. "That's the best approach. You should always explore and find what resonates with you," he said, genuinely pleased. After their discussions, Jonathan suggested they take a walk in Central Park. The spring air was fresh, and the park was alive with people enjoying the beautiful day. As they strolled through the greenery, they talked about everything from Samuel's interests in engineering to Maria's aspirations for her future. "Mom, what do you want to do?" Samuel asked, glancing at her. "You've always been there for me, but I want to know what you want." Maria smiled at her son, touched by his concern. "I want to start fresh, to find a way to support myself and pursue my passions," she said, her voice filled with hope. "Perhaps I can look into taking classes or finding a job that allows me to be creative." Jonathan listened intently, appreciating the strength of both Maria and Samuel. "If you're interested, I could help you explore opportunities," he offered. "There's always room for talented people in my organization." Maria was taken aback by the offer. "Really? That would mean a lot, Jonathan," she replied, her heart swelling with gratitude. As they continued their walk, the three of them began to feel like a true family, each step forward forging new connections and healing old wounds. The city buzzed around them, but for the first time they felt like they could tackle whatever challenges lay ahead together. Later that afternoon, they returned to Jonathan's apartment, where he pulled out a photo album filled with memories from his travels and experiences over the years. He shared stories behind each picture, opening up about his life in ways Samuel had never expected. "This is me in Italy, and this was at a conference in Tokyo," he explained, pointing at the images. "It's been a wild ride, but I've learned so much about myself and what I truly value." As they looked through the album, Samuel began to feel more connected to Jonathan. The man he had once viewed as a distant figure was becoming more relatable, more human. "It's interesting to see you in these places," Samuel remarked. "I never thought about what your life was like outside of the business." Jonathan smiled, his heart lightening. "I hope we can create new memories together, Samuel, and I'm here to support you as you find your path," he said sincerely. As the day came to a close, they gathered for dinner at a nearby restaurant. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, filled with laughter and conversation. Samuel felt a sense of belonging he had longed for, and it was evident that Jonathan was genuinely invested in forming a relationship. As they shared their meal, Jonathan raised his glass for a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, looking at both Maria and Samuel with warmth. "May we embrace the opportunities ahead and support each other along the way." Samuel clinked his glass against Jonathan's and Maria's, feeling a sense of unity and hope. "To new beginnings," he echoed, a smile breaking across his face. As they savored their dinner, the bonds between them continued to strengthen. For the first time, Samuel felt that perhaps this was not just an encounter with his father, but the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one filled with possibilities, understanding, and, most importantly, family. As they left the restaurant and walked back through the vibrant streets of New York, Samuel knew he was at a crossroads. The decision to accept Jonathan's offer would not come easily, but he was ready to embrace the journey ahead. Tomorrow was a new day, and he was determined to face it with an open heart and mind, ready to explore the future that lay ahead. If you like this inspiring story, subscribe to our channel and check out what we have for you and your grandchildren in the pinned comment below.